What were the Nuremberg trials and who were some of the people involved? Well, today I'll be answering that question for you. So sit down right over there and let me explain. First, let's start off by explaining what the trials of Nuremberg even were. A group of 13 trials held in Nuremberg, Germany from 1945 to 1949, where around 21 Nazi convicts were either sentenced to life in prison or to hanging for their crimes. All because of this man right here. Oh, fascinating. At this point, people were arguing over how they would get punished, even with Joseph Stalin chiming in saying, they should all get executed. Now, obviously, this wasn't going to work, so all four Allied powers put their minds together to create a code of laws in order to give fair punishment. This was the London Charter of the International Military Tribunal, or IMT for short. For this document, there were three main categories. The first being crimes against peace. This category was about the antagonization of war. Nobody likes someone who antagonizes, especially not internationally. The second was war crimes. Now, this category included violating international laws and maltreatment of prisoners of war, or POWs. The last category, crimes against humanity, was mainly acts against people, which included murder, enslavement, or deportation based on someone's political, religious, or racial background. Now, with the rules set, the trials could be held, and out of the 13 trials, one of them stood out and was most notable, that being the trial of major war criminals. There were originally 24 people that were going to be held for trial, however, a few of them had either died during the war or committed suicide before their trial had begun. So the number was more like 21. These are in no particular order, but first on the chopping block was Ernst Kaltenbrunner. Kaltenbrunner was the chief of security police, which controlled the Gestapo, otherwise known as the secret German state police, and the security services. This man was found guilty of both war crimes and crimes against humanity. Next, we have Hitler's personal secretary, with power in Germany only second to Hitler himself, Martin Bormann. He was basically the bureaucratic power of the state, or otherwise the secret ruler of Germany, some would say. Unfortunately for the German government, Bormann died due to an apparent tank shell hitting his escape vehicle during the war. Even still, he was sentenced to death during the Nuremberg trials. That being said, some people have said to have seen him around the globe, including North Italy, South Tyrol, and Argentina. Although these were said to be true amongst foreigners, his remains were found near Leutner Station in West Berlin, which is cause of death to be cyanide capsules, popular suicide method for those trapped. Next was Karl Dönitz, successor that Hitler picked before his death, only sentenced to 10 years in prison for a few crimes that he had committed. Dönitz had permitted slave labor and slaughtered unarmed captives, and yet they let him go and didn't bring up the fact that he waged unrestrained submarine warfare against both the United States and Great Britain. After his 10 years in prison, he wrote his memoirs, retired, and died at the ripe age of 89, feeling accomplished. Wilhelm Frick, largely responsible for controlling the German nation under the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the NSDAP, was largely known for the seizure of Austria. Wilhelm Frick was the Reichsmeister of the Interior, giving him this opportunity to conquer Austria. While in Austria, Frick issued German law, military service laws, and enacted police security acts. Amongst the other laws that Frick wrote up, ones against the Jewish community were still being made in Germany, even when occupying Austria. Frick also enforced these laws that prohibited Jews from following various professions, and that confiscated private property of theirs. He also had a strange vendetta against people who he called useless eaters. These people were usually the disabled, elderly, or those in mental asylums, which were often being put to death, and Frick turned a blind eye to those actions and nothing about them. He was convicted under all three categories and was sentenced to death by hanging. Joachim von Ribbentrop joined the Nazi Party in 1932 and was given the title Foreign Policy Advisor. Later on in 1938, Ribbentrop became the Reichsmaster of Foreign Affairs. He was an expert at what he did, handling the country's foreign problems with ease. When the invasion of Norway and Poland was underway, he somehow found a way to justify these acts of aggression. Ribbentrop was always in conferences with Hitler, so he had time in advance to plan invasions, which allowed him to have a say in the deportation of Jews, which he had said that they must either be exterminated or taken to concentration camps. Also, lynching captive pilot POWs and executing a French general. He was then sentenced to death by hanging for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Next would have to be the chief of staff to the Minister of War at the time, Wilhelm Keitel. Yes, there are two Wilhelms in Hitler's cabinet. Why he chose that, I don't know. He was the High Command of Armed Forces and was a part of Hitler's military staff. Keitel was tried for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, like others, helping with invasions of Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands, along with setting up an assassination to justify an attack against Czechoslovakia. All of his invasions were said to be merciless, including other countries such as Greece and Yugoslavia, which he had planned to invade. Besides his invasions, which were commonplace for Keitel to set up at this point, he also ordered the liquidation of Jewish communities and ordered attacks on soldiers in the East by putting to death 50 to 100 communist troops per German soldier killed. Keitel also condoned the absolute destruction of an ideology which others had thought war was supposed to be somewhat chivalrous in nature, which would explain why Keitel was so ruthless to prisoners of wars, where he would execute all political commissars and any civilians suspected of acting against troops, all without trial. Keitel appropriately was sentenced to death by hanging during the trials of Nuremberg. Even though most were convicted and then sentenced to either prison time or death, there were a few that managed to escape with barely any punishment. Some would say only a slap on the wrist. One particular person, Hans Frisch, would be lucky enough to escape unscathed. Hans was a radio commentator at the time of the war, at first not affiliated with the Nazi Party, only talking once a week about recent events on his own program. After Hitler found out his usefulness, though, Hans became the head of Wireless News Services, which was a Reich government agency. With this title under his belt, Hans was able to progress to head of the Nazi Party's propaganda department and eventually became the propaganda, military, and plenipotentiary. Hans, while on air, would manipulate people with hidden themes and subliminal messages about problems occurring according to the Nazi Party, which included the leadership principle, the Jewish problem, and the problem of living space or other Nazi ideas. However, as bad as those actions are, Hans was never able to gain enough recognition to attend conferences with Hitler and the rest of his cabinet. Hans would also spread false news, but whether that was intentional or not was unknown. And with no direct connection with military planning, the judges at Nuremberg had found him not guilty, being one of few. And with that, all Allied forces were content with punishments giving out at Nuremberg and were hoping that it would be enough to keep others from following in their steps. Some people would ask whether or not it was bad to demonize an ideal that they had had. Most would say that it was okay in this particular situation in which said party is also causing the death of so many others. Thank you for listening. I'm gonna go take a nap now. It's been a long day. Oh, you're you're still here?